All right, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together. Pray that you will help us to make a little sense of this world in light of the way that it fits into your prophetic timeline and the things that you said would come about in the end times. Pray that you'll bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to call this deliberate. I think I spelled that right. So last Sunday I made an spelling error in my title slide, which everybody was gracious enough not to tell me except a couple people. They know who they are, which is okay. I'm not upset about that. Just some other platforms that we're on, we talk about this convergence of events. So this week I'm going to look at some of the things that are going on culturally and geopolitically, Middle East, and some of the developments in Afghanistan. I have a couple of long video clips that I want to play from people that I think are well worth listening to on this particular subject of Afghanistan and what's going on and what the bigger picture is. And I think the conclusion from those that you'll find is that there is this convergence of events. It's deliberate, and it's just made a really huge mess of the world. So I think I read this last Sunday. I think it bears repeating almost every Sunday now. There's a number of passages, 1 Timothy 4. Now the Spirit speaks expressly that in the latter times, some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. It is another week in which there has just been an incredible amount of things that have happened that standing alone I think would be very significant, but then the other part of it is that they are all happening at the same time. So let me start off first with this tweet from Tim Keller. Congratulations, Greg, on your appointment. And he cites Greg M. Epstein. Greg Epstein was the person I cited last week who is the an atheist chaplain at Harvard. Harvard was a Christian institution when it was founded. They now have about 40 chaplains for all sorts of Buddhist and this Eastern mysticism religion. And of course they have Christianity and others. Tim Keller is or was the pastor of First Redeemer, I think, in Manhattan. I've been critical of Keller in the past, and here he is congratulating this atheist on being appointed as the head of the chaplains at Harvard. And I saw a number of Christians, Christianity Today had an article that was like, it's okay, it's a great thing for Christianity, the propagation of Christianity, that an atheist is the head of the chaplains at Harvard. It allows us to get our message out. And we should be doing this interfaith stuff. And usually what happens with this interfaith stuff, as you know, is that it leads to just a mess. We've seen plenty of interfaith things happen over the past couple of decades. And I guess my question is, how did they work out overall for the evangelical church? I will say this, 20 years ago last month, I spoke on the coming effect, I should dig out some of the slides sometimes, on the coming effect of postmodernism on the evangelical church, and that it was not a good thing that was going to happen. I did that in Southern California at a church conference, and I actually had pastors come up to me afterwards and say, John, you don't understand postmodernism. That's actually going to be a good thing for the church because people are asking questions. And so that led, in relatively quick form, to something that had been around for a while at that time, but then later emerged from the shadows, which was the emerging church, or the emergent or emerging church. And then people tried, no, you said emergent, you really meant emerging. And I'm like, it doesn't make any difference. It's all bad. It's all postmodernism. And none of this will have a good effect on the church. And I stand by what I said 20 years ago. I even used the example in that talk of the Wexner Center for the Arts down at Ohio State University. Have any of you seen this monstrosity down there? It actually was a postmodern building. It had stairways that went nowhere. There were walls that were bent inward that weren't square. But this was a great example of modern, postmodern architecture. And how did all that Wexner stuff work out in the long term? Not so well. So first, just a little bit of weather news. We had this hurricane that hit the United States last week, Ida. It was a Category 4 storm. Depending on how they measure it, by one measurement, it was the 5th most powerful hurricane to ever hit the United States. Now, it didn't do as much damage as Katrina 16 years earlier, but the interesting thing was this actually made landfall 16 years to the day that Katrina had made landfall in the United States. And that was probably, I think it still is, the most devastating hurricane in terms of damage. Even though it was only a Category 3, it was a slow-moving storm and it caused a lot of damage. The pictures are just, horrific. Of course, it messed up the natural gas lines that led to explosions and fire. Power is out to about 1 million homes, 1 million customers in Louisiana and elsewhere. Some people won't get power back for at least a month, and now they're having a record heat wave. It's pretty miserable down there. You need to pray for the people, and if you want to, I'm sure there's plenty of relief organizations that you can contribute to help the people out. Another thing that happened was the oil refineries, about 20% of the oil refineries in the United States are based in Louisiana in this area, and they are all shut down, and the power can be restored. As a result of that, there's going to be less gas available. Gas prices are going to go up. I've heard that, and I didn't verify it, I heard Pastor Marco from DeVore speaking, and I think he said that the gas in California is close to $6 a gallon. That makes ours look, I think I paid $2.72, I think I found it for the other day, regular. So it's not that today, but this is going to go on for a while. And I think what you need to understand is there's going to be these disruptions as we get closer and closer to the end. If you have not made any preparation to lay aside some water and food, staples, if you have medications, try to get some extra medications if you can, because I just think there's going to be disruption. We're already seeing disruption in the supply chain. I went in a major retailer the other day and I was kind of shocked at the long sections of empty shelves that they had in that store. Now, some places you go, it doesn't seem like there's any problems, unless you like steak, and you're not super wealthy, then that can be a problem. But there's going to be some disruptions in the supply chain. I was reading articles this week that car dealers just do not have new cars, and they thought that the chip shortage would have been resolved somewhat by now, but it's not been resolved. Because now what's happening is there are COVID outbreaks in areas that are manufacturing the chips like Vietnam and other places, and the factories are all shut down. In addition to that, the shipping container availability is down. There are, I believe, I read that there's an all-time record of container ships off the California coast waiting to unload, 44 container ships. And these are huge. If you've ever seen them, they're huge ships. And if you've ever been by the port, there's that bridge that goes between the port of Los Angeles and then Long Beach. And it's a massive port, and it looks like there's 1 million of these giant containers laying around down there and all kinds of stack. I don't know how, it's amazing when I see this, it's amazing that anything gets from point A to point B. Or that if you order something, sometimes it's there at your house the next day. So the supply chain thing has always been, in my view, almost a bit of a miracle. And now I think we're going to see disruptions. And we don't know how long they're going to last. So I think you need to prepare for a few weeks or more of not being able to get anything. And I mean not anything like water, get some candles. You can find prepping websites out there as the things that you should do to lay up, but I think it's well advisable. Now, I'm not predicting that it's actually going to be necessary. If it's not necessary, then eat the stuff up later. But we're entering a very, I think, difficult time, particularly with the regime that we have in charge, but more about that a little later. Well, Ida didn't stop in Louisiana. It moved on up through the southeast, up through the Appalachia, and then hit New York. And when it hit New York and Long Island and New Jersey, New York City at Central Park, they had the highest amount of rainfall in 1 hour that they've ever recorded. About 3¼ inches of rain in Central Park in an hour. Well, if you've ever been to New York, when it rains hard in New York, it barely keeps up anyway. There's water everywhere. Well, you can imagine there was just a massive amount of flooding. The subways were flooded. There were, in that Northeast region, there were, at least last I heard, there were 45 people that were that died as a result of this. Many of them died in the New York area, New York and New Jersey area, that were living in basement apartments. The apartments just flooded and the people drowned, and they could get out. They could not get out. And so now they're going after the landlords. A lot of these apartments were illegal apartments. They had not been approved by the city or anything, and they didn't have emergency egress, exit abilities. So it's a problem. And again, the thing that you heard all the time this week was, this is unprecedented. This just never happens. This has not happened before. Now, back in the time of Katrina, actually about 6 years after Katrina, we were in Jerusalem, Israel, and we were coming home. We were at Ben Gurion Airport. We were with a group, Mike and Jerry Clapham and some others, just a very small group. Our flight got delayed out of Ben Gurion. So I'm standing there at Ben Gurion, and I was talking to somebody, and I mentioned the humor columnist, Dave Barry. Remember Dave Barry? I haven't seen much from him lately. I suppose he still used to write out of Miami, I think. But, we were, I said, he wrote an article about this, ha, 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 and this Orthodox Jewish guy, in the sense that he's not a Hasidic Jew, but he didn't have the beard and everything, but he was wearing the kippah, and he was Orthodox. And he goes, "Oh yeah, Dave Barry. I love Dave Barry. Here you got to read this article about Dave Barry's colonoscopy." And he hands me his computer with the article open, and that soon led to an article. He was a very nice guy. We talked while our plane was delayed for the next. We talked for 4 hours. Now you may not believe that I could stand there and talk to somebody for 4 hours, but in this case, I was able to overcome my natural innate shyness and talk to him. But it was a fascinating conversation, and his name was Jay. And during the conversation, Jay said, "Listen, you Christians," it soon turned to Israel and Bible prophecy, and the significance of the state of the refounding of Israel, which I adopt or I adhere to, and and he said, "Listen, you Christians, you need to understand that if you in America, if you do things to Israel, God will judge you. God will cause things to happen in America. It happens all the time." And then he proceeded to tell me, and I had already reached this conclusion, by the way. Bill Koenig, who wrote Eye to Eye, is a very good friend of mine, and we talk about it a lot. But Jay said, "Listen, when Katrina happened, you guys were forcing us out of Gaza. And when we were forced out of Gaza, the percentage of land that we were required to evacuate relative to the size of the state of Israel was exactly the same percentage as the land that had to be evacuated by your people relative to the size of the United States in Katrina." And it did match up. And it was a massive insurance event. So when I see these things happen, and as Bill Koenig and I have discussed over and over and over again for, I don't know, we've known each other for getting close to 20 years. We've talked about this. This happens all the time. You can almost bank on it. And so it was interesting as this thing happened. Biden was supposed to meet with Bennett at 11:30 on Thursday. At 11 a.m. on Thursday, the National Hurricane Center, 1/2 hour before the meeting was to begin, posted its first advisory for Tropical Depression 9. By 2 p.m. that day, the storm had become Tropical Storm Ida. And as Biden and Bennett were meeting at the White House on Friday, remember it got delayed because of the bombing in Kabul, Tropical Storm Ida, during their meeting, became Hurricane Ida. During the meeting, it was discussed, one of the things that was discussed was that Biden and Bennett, well, I have some, but here's a readout, by the way, here's a readout from the Secretary of State's office, the Department of State, about what was discussed on Thursday between Bennett and Secretary of State Blinken. Or it should be called blinking. Well, that's my personal opinion. The Secretary also emphasized that Israelis and Palestinians alike deserve equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and dignity, which is important in its own right and as a means to advance prospects for a two-state solution. Secretary Blinken and Prime Minister Bennett agreed on the importance of working toward Israel's inclusion in the visa waiver program in order to benefit both U.S. citizens and Israeli citizens. Bennett also, when he returned, he came home and he said, listen, all the goals I wanted to meet were achieved. Now, I view Bennett as a sort of I call him baby prime minister, but you could call him sort of prime minister. I mean, he has the whopping support of about 5% of the people who sit in the Knesset actually voted for him. This is unprecedented. And it appears to me that he appears to be compromising. I would highly recommend that you listen to the podcast or video that Caroline Glick puts up each week. It usually pops up late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning here in the U.S. Just go to carolineglick.com where she posts this. She also posts links to her articles. And she has a discussion with usually a fellow journalist writer in Israel, but sometimes she has other people on, like what I consider the great guy, a great thinker named David Wormser, and others in the U.S. security apparatus that understand things about the Middle East. So here's just from this article in the Times of Israel that coincided, that came out with this meeting that took place. This was when Bennett returned on Sunday. He could not fly. The meeting took place late enough that he could not fly back to Israel without violating Shabbat. So he stayed over till Sunday. He arrived home early Sunday morning in Israel. It says this, Army Radio also reported that Bennett and Biden had agreed during their meeting not to emphasize their disagreements regarding construction and West Bank settlements. The Biden administration will reportedly not pressure Israel on the matter while Bennett's government won't approve massive construction. Army Radio said both sides are determined not to define the relationship on this issue. Bennett, when he returned, said the visit was exceptional. Many thanks to the security officers, the embassy staff, the guys from the media who came to do their work. I hope we will continue to work so well together, everyone. Welcome to Israel. And so understand there's a very significant component there that Bennett, he's not going to agree to any annexation while he's prime minister. He's not going to, he says he's not going to agree to a two-state solution, but he's not going to be prime minister, but for a little over another year, and assuming the government holds together, which is very questionable at this point. But Lapid would then become the prime minister, and Lapid has said he's going to go after a two-state solution. Now, Ayelet Shaked, who is a former Likud member of Naftali Bennett's party, She's now the Interior Ministry. She says if Lapid goes after a two-state solution, the Israeli government will fail. And I think it'll fail for a number of reasons, just because there's nobody that really supports a two-state solution except a bunch of left-wing people in Israel. And anybody who says Lapid is not left-wing, I think, is not telling you the truth. So again, here we have this, we do things with Israel. We really force Bennett to say, I'm not going to build houses for Israeli Jews in Judea and Samaria, and something happens. It happens all the time. And I wish our government leadership would get the message, but they don't. At the same time this is going on, these are some pictures from around Lake Tahoe, the South Tahoe fire in California, near the California-Nevada border. Pretty amazing pictures of these. And this is a place that has not burned for some period of time. This is a ski resort near there. Just, really incredible pictures of these fires. Now, I got some of these pictures, by the way, I got from Turkish newspaper Daily Sabah, which is a Erdogan, the president of Turkey. It's essentially his mouthpiece. It's one of his newspapers that essentially just puts forth Erdogan's party line. The worst is a paper called Yeni Sefek, but the Daily Sabah is not very far behind in terms of how much they pander to the president of Turkey. And it's interesting that these pictures, there was a tremendous number of pictures about the fires in California, and the Turkish paper, not as much in some of the US newspapers that I looked at, but when Turkey had fires a few weeks ago that were pretty devastating, particularly in southeast Turkey, in some of the cities on the Mediterranean or the Aegean Sea, there weren't as many pictures in Daily Sabah about their fires as there were about our fires. So this is another thing that you always need to look at when you're looking at all of these news reports, is that all newspapers have an editorial bias. You have to read through it to sort of get to the truth. But there's no doubt that these fires in California, the Dixie Fire, which I think is still burning, is still not controlled, is the largest fire in the history of the state of California, at least in recorded history. And they have fires all the time out there. I mean, we've been out there where you could see fires that had burned from near where my in-laws lived, all the way up to Big Bear, and that's a distance of 30, 40 miles. You could see the burn area all the way up through the mountains. So it's not unusual, but what's unusual is that it happened earlier this year than before. It's very much like the COVID outbreak that we're going through right now. That's usually, there's a thing that some of us that are old enough remember, a thing called flu season, except this year. And there's also a childhood virus, I can't remember, it starts with a P, that's also breaking out in some areas of the United States among children, and that usually never comes around till November or December, and now it's breaking out in August. So everything is I think we can agree, everything is a bit disconcerting these days when we look at it. It's difficult, and it's easy to get caught up to be driven by fear, because there are a lot of things coming at you all the time. I go down to my office occasionally, and I'm still amazed to me that the parking garage in a large, I would say, because my office is in there, the most prestigious building in Columbus, but really, the Huntington Center, and the parking garage is not even maybe 35%, 40% full during the middle of the business day. When it used to be you couldn't find a place to park in there unless you had a monthly pass. So it's just everything is so disrupted. There was a CDC order that was issued. I don't remember if I talked about this last week or not. On evictions, it was just put in place an eviction moratorium nationwide. That had no legal basis for the CDC to do that. They had no constitutional authority to do that. And the Supreme Court suggested that in a decision back in June that, you know, this order, we're going to let this order go this time because it's almost ready to run out. So what did the CDC do? Did they take anything to heart that the Supreme Court had said? No, they went out and put in another moratorium. Now that moratorium's been challenged and it's been struck down. And so it's struck down. Now what is everybody on the left is upset? Well, look how uncaring they are. And this is part of the Supreme Court shadow docket and we just can't let this stand. And so now everything is disrupted again. And there's all these landlords, and they're not all big corporate landlords. These are mom and pops that have investment properties and they survive because people pay them rent. And now they're a year and a half, they haven't been paid rent. And now the Biden administration is like, well, we're going to still challenge this. We don't care what the Supreme Court said. We're going to do what we want, which seems to be related to the title that I chose today, that it's deliberate. There's deliberate scofflaws. They're deliberately doing these things. Now, there's a couple other weird news items. This happened down in Georgia, in Atlanta. They found 200 headless goats floating in the river. This article, it says, in a bizarre incident, people were shocked to discover the bodies of about 200 goats floating in the Chattahoochee River in the American state of Georgia. All of them had their heads cut off, sparking rumors of some ritual. Now, this happened, there was actually, I researched it, there was an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about 3 years ago talking about a dozen headless goats being found in, and I believe, the same river. So they think it's a Santeria, it's sort of a voodoo type practice, a satanic ritual that somebody is doing. Nevertheless, this is not something that happens every day. What doesn't happen every day is I couldn't find anything in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about it this time. So 12 goats 3 years ago got news, made the paper, and I couldn't find anything. Now, it may be in there, my research, I just wasn't able to dig it up. So here is an economic report. Hiring rate slows as grip of variant hinders recovery. 235,000 jobs were added in August, which is much less than they expected. So now where they say, well, this must be because of the Delta variant being active out there, and it does appear to be active. We know a lot of people who've been ill with this thing recently. And there's all kinds of theories as to why it's out there, what's causing it, and how did it happen. And this is what happens with viruses. They mutate. Now, there are many explanations for why they mutate. I'll let you look those up online, just because the oligarchs don't like us talking about that. And so I'm not going to put the channel at risk by discussing why this is happening, or what my opinion is as to why it's happening. And eventually I'll put something up on Rumble where we have a little bit more freedom to talk about this. But this is, the other thing that's going on is that there are about 8.5 million people unemployed in the United States. At the same time, there are about 10 million open jobs. Now, it would seem to be that anybody who wants to work could work, right? 8.5 million unemployed, 10 million employed. And where do you go today around Central Ohio or anywhere and you do not see a help wanted sign? Everywhere I go, I see a help wanted sign, even places out in the country, like at a golf course that I might happen to visit, just happen to drive by and visit. There'll be a help wanted sign there everywhere I go. But when you try to explain to people, well, maybe it's because people are getting benefits that exceed what they could earn if they were actually working. Oh, you can't say, how do you know that? How dare you judge these people? And I'm like, I'm just making an observation that any person with even average intelligence, even below average intelligence, would be able to conclude if you pay people more not to work than they would make working, it's likely that they're not going to work. In this, we now have this. Here is Russia has come out and warning of a global financial crisis. It seems that everything is being held in check by a threat. People that I talk to in banking are concerned that something could shift very quickly and things would change. At the same time, we have even banks are getting into this wokeism. You see Bank of America has instructed their people in implementing critical race theory and other things. Verizon has done it. I saw that now they've come out with some kind of explanation, but Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who was in the Trump administration, pardoned by President Trump, and you can criticize General Flynn for being a lobbyist for Turkey, that's fine. But now, because he may be involved in some things that question the narrative that the mainstream media wants to put out, JP Morgan Chase, big bank around here, a lot of employees from JP Morgan, they cut him off. They cut off his credit cards. And this is a concern that I have, that is this Chinese social credit type system is going to be implemented. This is going to be increasingly a problem. PayPal and the ADL have announced that they're going after people that they don't like what they believe or say. And you have this, I've talked about week after week after week after week now, this constant narrative about the fact that people who oppose the Biden administration are white supremacists, terrorists, and now we'll see, even this week, they're being likened to the Taliban in the mainstream media. It's pretty shocking. China also is in a bit of, I think, some economic throes. There's a large property empire over there. Remember years ago I was putting up those videos of cities that were built for 2 million people and nobody lived there? Big shopping malls and empty. Well, a lot of that, there's this thing, the chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak. So this property tycoon is very heavily in debt and he's having trouble. And if he goes under, it's going to have a ripple effect through the Chinese economy. China has also been going after their tech sector in a number of ways to cut down the wealth that the people in the tech sector have developed, like Jack Ma at Alibaba and other companies. You notice how they've sort of disappeared. They had almost celebrity status, and they're still around, but they've been taken to the woodshed, to Xi's woodshed, and told, you need to back off, you need to be more devoted to the party and what the party says, what the Communist Party says, because that's who's in control. Now, a couple of weeks I talked to you about this. Apple was going to put this app on a phone that was going to be able to look at your photographs and determine whether you had child pornography or something else on your phone. And nobody wants to support child pornography. But the problem is that from a privacy standpoint, it never ends there. Apple has been spanked around quite a bit by privacy experts and people in the tech field. And so Apple came out and said, well, we're going to delay the implementation of this app or whatever it is, the code that we were going to put on everybody's phone to do this detection. Because people don't like it. There's I think I mentioned the story of the daughter of the sheikh in charge of Dubai, United Arab Emirates. It's a collection of, 6, 7, or 8 little sheikdoms, some bigger, some others, and they sort of like one sheik to kind of control everything. Well, Dubai, because of its financial prominence and development, seems to have it. Well, he had a daughter. She thought she was oppressed. She was about 32. I think she was about the age, maybe just a little bit younger than his fifth or sixth wife that he was going through a divorce with. But she fled. And she had made painstaking plans to do this. And she was on a boat in the Indian Ocean, almost to the coast of India, where she would maybe get free and be able to live her life in hiding, but still free from her father's control. But she had this Pegasus app had been put on her phone, and they were able to track her, and commandos went 10 miles from the coast of India and pulled her off of that and took her back home. And this is the problem. This is why everybody's concerned about this tracking software. There's also this gaming that's going place. This is an article from, I think this is from Bloomberg, Opinion, How Gaming Will Change Humanity as We Know It. So you see these people talking about artificial intelligence and merging of man and machine. And so secular people are talking about, we're going to change humanity. Remember the videos I played of Dr. Hariri at the World Economic Forum at Davos from a few years ago, where he says, we're going to get a place where people won't even have any value as human anymore. And what are we going to do with them then? And I don't know that he was advocating anything, but that there are people thinking about this. What happens when you have no value to the machine, your humanity? Well, there was this decision this week on the new Texas abortion law. And the new Texas abortion law, so I'll say a couple things. I'm opposed to abortion, as you know that. I thought the law was very clever in that it sort of took the push to enforce things out of the hands of the government and put it on private citizens, which some people don't like. I mean, I don't like it that the government is doing that with the tech oligarchs. The government is effectively outsourcing censorship to the tech oligarchs. You've seen Jen Zuckerberger, or Jen the Red, as some people are calling her now, talking about how they contact Facebook and Google and stuff and get things taken down. And it happens all the time. I'm trying to remember what it was. There was something that happened, and people had posted about it. Oh, it was there were some groups that were organizing not to get that thing that relates to Charlie Vector, 019er. You know what I'm talking about? If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sure you'll figure it out. So, they're mandating that. A lot of employers are mandating that. Governments are mandating that here in the United States. So people are challenging that. And so they were trying to organize a meeting to get together. And Facebook, Google, Twitter removed all the notices about the meeting where people were going to get together to organize. And I think it was related to that thing. It might have been related to something else that the people at Facebook and Twitter didn't like. It didn't meet their community standards, which means what we think and what we believe and what you believe has to be wrong because we believe the truth. And they call us the Taliban. It's crazy. So anyway, so the Texas law sort of did a conservative version of what the left does with the tech oligarchs, the leftists in the government. And the Supreme Court came out, they had a decision. And of course, there was a complete meltdown in the pro-abortion community. 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court would not issue a stay of the implementation of the Texas law. Now, they didn't strike the law down or anything like that. Well, immediately, I have, sometimes I track people. So I track things from the ACLU. And immediately, so I'm on their email list. And I was getting emails from the ACLU. Oh my goodness, the world's coming to an end. They didn't do anything to strike down this particular law. It's just absolutely horrible what they're doing. The world's coming to an end. Now, what happened was the state and the Supreme Court said, listen, we're not opining as to whether a state court or another federal court could enter into some kind of decision. We're just not doing anything right now. And it was a 5-4 decision. It was the three leftists, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Breyer, joined by the new leftist, which everybody used to think was a centrist, maybe, but he's not. It's John Roberts, the Chief Justice. So the 5 conservatives on the court would not issue a stay of the implementation of the law. And here it was just a very short 1 or 2 paragraph decision. There were long, many-page dissents, but that was this. And look at some of this. This is from the Financial Times in the UK. Abortion access in the U.S. is falling apart. Politicians must step up. Now look, if the Texas law is implemented and it's ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court and Roe versus Wade is overturned, that does not mean that abortion has been banned. That's when the really hard work will begin, because you're going to have to fight this in every city or every state and maybe county and city, because the Supreme Court will just say, let the states decide. The states can decide this. So I don't think that you're going to see a ban, absent a huge revival in the United States, I don't think you're going to see a ban on abortion. But there's going to be a big fight. It'll be a big political fight, like it always should have been. It should have been decided by 9 people, by the Supremes. They just aren't capable of doing that. And so this led to just some unhinged people on the left, like one of our favorite unhinged people on the left, Joy Reid from Readout, whose Twitter handle is Joy and pro-democracy in parentheses, Reid. It should be, I think pro-democracy should be in scare quotes. Not air quotes, scare quotes. But anyway, here's what she tweeted. The American right has made it crystal clear for a long time what they believe the worth of woman is: to look pretty, make babies, stay home, cook and clean for her husband only, who they're not to question or, God forbid, compete with in the workplace. They want the 1950s back. Now listen, I know a lot of people that are conservative, a lot of people in the church, and there are very few that believe anything that this person said about them. It's a bold-faced lie. Then she goes this: the Christian right are as retrograde and anti-modern as the Taliban. Hey, Joy, iPad, whoops. I need that for my next slide, which is a video. iPad, iPhone, MacBook, Bluetooth mouse, whatever. I'm not anti-modern. And she changes her hairstyle like 3 times a week. You probably don't pay attention to her. But the Christian writer is retrograde and anti-modern as the Taliban, just with a different ultra-conservative distortion of an Abrahamic religion. She wouldn't know an Abrahamic religion if it came up and smacked her in the face, figuratively speaking. And women in red states will soon find out what it means to live under the control of a racial, religious, man-dominant theocracy. Now, I think she doesn't like religious Christian conservatives. I'm just kind of picking that up a little bit. So she had on Frankie Schaefer to talk about this. the son of Francis Schaeffer, the great Christian apologist, and he is, he wrote some ridiculous book about being an a good Christian because he's an atheist or something now, which is the disconnect of the postmodern mind. So this is what he had to say. Listen to this.
When we went out, evangelicals were the people who wanted no part of this, and we had to talk them into this crusade. And now, fast forward 40 years, and we have a situation in Texas right now tonight where the American Taliban, because that's what it is, there's not an American evangelical right-wing movement, there is an American Taliban, is weirdly similar in so many ways to the Middle Eastern Islamist terrorists. And here's another weird one. Do you know a few years ago, some of the Islamist terrorist activists in Pakistan and other countries were murdering vaccine doctors and nurses who were coming in to try to vaccinate against polio, with some mythological conspiracy theories about how this was part of the US government plot. Think about this tonight, Joy. The evangelical voter in Texas who backed Donald Trump is now also the voter who is calling vaccines some sort of government conspiracy and wanting to stop Joe Biden's program to deliver our country from the COVID virus. There's a weird convergence of factors here, whether it's Handmaid's Tale and taking away women's rights, or whether it's the anti-vaccine movement that has grown out of this weird fascination with conspiracy theories and misinformation. Wherever you touch it, the evangelical movement is no longer the one that my dad and I tried to talk into radicalism, and sadly were too successful in doing back in the 70s. Today, and I want to say this again, there is no evangelical political movement. There is a new American Taliban, and their goal is theocracy, which means to take our religious beliefs, which for them are Old Testament law, not Christianity, and force secular Americans, non-evangelical Americans, progressive Americans, women, people of color into that box. And this is not hyperbole. This is happening right now tonight in Texas. This is happening right now with the people dying of COVID, children dying of COVID, because pro-lifers have seen fit to stand against Joe Biden's vaccine as a way to own the libs. And their price is to be literally bioterrorists.
Okay, so have they approved a vaccine for children yet? I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Do you understand that facts don't really matter to a guy like Frankie Schaeffer? This, crazy, this is an editorial from the Financial Times. Yeah, this is the Supreme Court making cracks in the world for everything. Here is a example of how the left goes. This is a candidate for socialist candidate Tiffy Cabane, a shoo-in to earn a spot on the city council representing Western Queens after November's election. And what she wants to do is, if you go out and somebody shoots you or beats you up, of course we want you to get taken care of, but the person who did that will not be arrested. You will set up a reconciliation meeting with them to work out what kind of punishment or what kind of reparations the person should pay you, or what you should maybe pay them because you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when they wanted to do something that they wanted to do. This is a candidate in Queens, New York, for city council. Even The Economist, which is, I think, as one person I listen to says, this is the tip sheet for the party of Davos. This is one of their main magazines. This is as New World Order and globalist as they come. But even The Economist cover this week is the threat from the illiberal left. They have a series of articles in there. How did American wokeness jump from elite schools to everyday life? I'll give you one explanation. Because it's the end times. And this is the kind of thing that happens in the end times. What did you think the end times were going to look like? I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I was lamenting in a Facebook Messenger discussion with somebody about, this is very upsetting, this is very upsetting. And the person says to me, John Haller, what did you think the end times were going to look like? And I'm like, don't quote me to me. How dare you? Who do you think you are? And there's a great article. So the Economist has this a couple of months ago in the Begin Sadat Center, which is a great sort of Mideast worldview analysis. They had an article by Dr. Alex Jaffe, April 7th, 2021, called the Europeanized USA. Here is his summary. America is undergoing a rapid transformation, and Dr. Jaffe is a professor, I don't remember, I think it's out west someplace. So pray for him, because obviously this is not mainstream university. Hope he has tenure. This is not what would be acceptable in the American university today, by and large. America is undergoing a rapid transformation founded in a moral panic over race that masks the exercise of class-based power, in which technology companies and left-wing politics have united to wield unprecedented control. The outcome will likely be a union of Europeanized states where freedoms are severely curtailed and social cohesion is minimized in favor of dependency. Several processes, he says, familiar to Europeans have taken hold with ferocity in the US. Massive censorship and self-censorship of the media in the name of mitigating hate and shaping institutions and attitudes, creating palpable gaps between realities unfolding in the streets and attitudes. Politicization of government, already mobilized to defeat the Trump the interloper and marginalize his supporters at all levels in the name of safety over the course of the pandemic, leading to pervasive restrictions on civil liberties, including freedom of speech, movement, assembly, and even religion. An alliance of technology monopolies to shape all narratives regarding health and safety, and more generally to foment a sense of crisis that has now been extended to include the prevention of hate via such methods as deplatforming individuals. Go see my talk on deplatforming humanity that I gave for that Canadian conference back in April, I think it was. And I did not see this article before I came up with that title, by the way, even though I think it may be, no, I did my presentation in March, so maybe he borrowed it from me. Never mind. I don't care. It's very, I love it when people agree with me. That's what we'll leave it at. An alliance of technology monopolies to shape all narratives regarding health and safety, and more generally to foment a sense of crisis that has now been extended to include the prevention of hate via such methods as deplatforming individuals, including a sitting president, and expunging old books from the culture for their newly declared racist imagery. A moral panic and uprooting of allegedly retrograde attitudes and histories, and opening of borders to mass illegal immigration in a pattern that first denies the problem exists. This is called gaslighting. You see a problem, you see something, and you say it, and they go, that's not happening. There's not a massive influx of, what are you talking about, John? There's not an influx of refugees. Do you need to have some counseling to get in touch with reality? It's not happening. And so this is a great thing, and this is what happened. They put in some rules in the European Union, talked about this a couple of years ago, where hate was going to be sort of central as to the governments would give notice to the platforms and they would have to remove hate, or they would get fined big time. So what happened is the tech companies said, well, okay, we'll just apply that worldwide. We don't really care about the freedoms in the United States because, well, we're trying to deplatform and undermine the United States. That's our goal. So we'll go along with, we love the Europeans, and we'll just all eventually will sit around and look at art and pretty pictures and drink coffee, in the corner cafe with our masks on. And so this is what is happening. This is a brilliant article by Dr. Jaffe, and you can look up some of his others there. And he says, but a country in a state of moral panic makes a poor ally. This was 6 months ago that he wrote this, 5 months ago. That should temper whatever schadenfreude is currently being enjoyed abroad, particularly in European capitals. The removal of Trump's pressure and the deep-seated anti-American resentment of the European elites have suddenly produced realignments with China to complement longstanding energy dependence on Russia. This is a brilliant article. I mean, he lays it out in a couple, 3 pages, exactly what's been going on and what I've been trying to talk about here for some time. So it goes a little bit further. I'm going to get to Afghanistan and the Middle East before. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. I know you will be disappointed. I have no videos of Joe Biden or Jim Zuckerberg this week, okay? So, in my infinite mercy, I have decided not to do that. Now, a week ago Friday, this publication came out. This is called Digital Documentation of COVID-19 Certificates Vaccination Status. This is published by the World Health Organization concerning vaccine passports. And you're seeing this everywhere now. Even though people have expressed concern about this, and it didn't look like they were going to do it, it seems like people that want to implement this are going to go forward with it. And the problem is that it's in New York, but it's not in White Plains, maybe, or it's in New York, but it's not in upstate New York. It's in New York City. And so what's going to happen is you're going to go places on a trip, and all of a sudden you're going to say, well, where's your vaccine status? And so this is going to be piecemeal. Now, I saw that Israel announced this morning that they're going to reopen to tourists in 2 weeks from today, as long as they have proof of vaccination. And someday I'm going to put a Rumble thing up, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, where it's going. But look, this is from their own publication, put out by the World Health Organization. This work was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the government of Estonia, which has been a big proponent of this digital identity thing, the state of Kuwait, and the Rockefeller Foundation. But the views of the funding bodies have not influence the content of this document. Oh, yeah, right. So the funding only influences you if you're somebody we don't agree with. And this relates back, remember, April 1st, it wasn't a April Fool's joke. I went through, this was one of the things that was on the World Economic Forum and Strategic Intelligence website. They have these wheels of these topics, I think hundreds of topics, and everything has a wheel, and you can click, and it takes you to this and takes you to this, and it's this multi-layered thing. And it does kind of look like the COVID thing that we've been talking about. One of the things that the World Economic Forum developed was a thing called the Commons Project and Common Pass. It's interesting, when you go to the original Common Pass website page, now it's down. You cannot access it. You can't even find it on archive.org. I'm not sure what's going on, but the Commons Project was part of the World Economic Forum. And guess who was part of the funding of that? As it says in the page, a nonprofit public trust established with support from the Rockefeller Foundation. The Commons Project builds and operates digital platforms and services for the common good. Of course it's for the common good. And so now this stuff is being implemented everywhere. So even before the publication, the ink on the publication that came out a week ago from the World Health Organization was being done, it's being implemented. And one of the places where it's being implemented is Australia. What happened to Australia? This guy is the premier of the state of I think Victoria, I think his name is Mark something, last name begins with an N. He's the guy I played last week who said, you won't be able to even remove your mask to drink your beer. And so this lunatic, the thing is, he has so much support in Australia. People like this. So I'm going to play for you a couple clips of him, and then something that's actually happening in Australia. And you be the judge as to whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay? They are implementing lockdowns and all sorts of things. And I saw a statistic from a couple months ago that this year, COVID deaths in Australia were 0 during a certain time period. During the same time period, suicides were 246. The world is mad. Mad meaning insane. So listen to this guy and this report from, I think, ABC News in Australia.
I think become a bigger part of our response is a lockout of many, many venues for those who are not vaccinated.
This is a picture from streets in, I don't know, either Victoria or New South Wales. I can't keep them straight.
After more than a year of treatment for pancreatic cancer, Marianne Allen and her husband Ross decided to have a holiday and visit family interstate. When the Victoria-New South Wales border closed, the fully vaccinated pair thought having letters from Marianne's doctors would be enough to return home to continue treatment. It wasn't.
We know that exemptions are given, but we didn't realise that they were being so unreasonable about granting them.
This isn't about, financial support. This is about getting people home. This is about getting parents back to children, partners back to their partners, carers. Some of these people are carers for other people, and those people need them to return home.
I know it's very deeply frustrating for people to be in another state wanting to come home. I don't want people locked in their houses, and I don't want people locked out of their state.
For people like Ross and Marianne, though, every day counts.
We're dealing with people's lives here. Time's precious and time's short.
Andrea Hoff, ABC News, Melbourne.
Another 12 people have died with COVID and more than 1,400 infected in New South Wales. But there's better news north of the border. A little boy stranded in New South Wales for 8 weeks has flown into Queensland on a charity flight to be reunited with his mum. In a heartwarming scene, 3-year-old Memphis Francis ran across the tarmac at Brisbane's Archerfield Airport into the arms of his mother, Dominique Facer. He'd been stuck in a hotspot while visiting his grandparents' farm. His story captured hearts and drew community criticism about a lack of compassion. Yesterday, an exemption allowed him to fly in on an Angel flight.
We are so excited to get him home. His father is just over the moon.
Grandmother was on the plane with him but was immediately sent back home.
Now, does this seem normal to you? This child went to see his grandparents, and for, what should I say, 8 weeks? 2 months. This maniac, they locked down the borders between the states and Australia. And this kid could not see his mother at the age of 3. Listen, I don't want to hear anything from anybody that says, let every soul be subject to the higher powers. The higher powers are the constitutions of these countries that are being violated by these maniacs. Okay? You think this is cruel? You don't think this is cruel? And did you see that they're on a tarmac out in the open? And the police are standing right there at their shoulders. And as soon as it happens, hey, Grandma, you're on your way back to your state. This is sick. You want to think that's sick? Shouldn't let this stuff irritate me. What did you think the end times are going to look like, John? Hey, I don't need that. This is from the National Law Review. And even hacking field, government surveillance bill passed by Parliament. The bill was introduced, went through its readings, and was passed by the Australian Parliament in 24 hours. The surveillance legislation amendment, it amends prior law passed by both houses on August 25. The new legislation extends the power of law enforcement agencies to identify and disrupt suspected online criminal activity through the provision of 3 new warrants. The new warrants provide the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission with the power to modify or delete the data of suspected offenders. They're called data disruption warrants. Collect intelligence on criminal networks, that's a network activity warrant, and take control of a suspected offender's online account, an account takeover warrant. These warrants can be issued in Australia now without judicial review. So what do you think this maniac that's in charge of New South Wales or Victoria, and I apologize to the people who didn't vote for him from the state that I missed, I think he's from New South Wales. What do you think somebody like him is going to do with this? This is the problem. And they'll say, well, this is to disrupt child pornography. Well, there's a way to do that. There's probably already existing laws to do that anyway. And so there seems to be an agenda behind this that's much deeper and bigger. This is what the act looks like. Surveillance legislation amendment. And it's, I think, hundreds of pages long. This is from the website of the Parliament of Australia. You can go to it and you can look at it. And there was a provision in here, I think maybe it got deleted in my last save. Essentially what it says is this. If the government comes to you and asks you to help them, so you're a technologically proficient person, and asks you to help them hack somebody's computer on the warrant that we gave, and you help them, you will be immune from liability. Okay, that's fine. You know what else it says? If you refuse to help the government, you will be charged with a crime. What happened to Australia? And by the way, the polling says people are pretty happy about this. So here you have this, you have, look, this is what the Times of London said about our abortion law. Texas abortion law will cleave America again. Well, let's look at some of the Middle East stuff that's going on. This will be a bit disjointed. We'll get to Afghanistan in just a minute. Look at this, Hezbollah. This is an article from a website called Israel Radar. Hezbollah controls Syrian army units on Israel border. And this is a problem. Look, this is what the Taliban did all over Afghanistan while the Americans were supposedly defeating them. They put in this command and control and social structure. This is what the article says. Along with the campaign against Iran and the struggle to halt its intensification in the Middle East, the IDF has attacked Hezbollah targets in Syria 31 times in the past 2 years, most of them weapons and equipment depots. A special document written by opposition figures in Syria reveals Hezbollah consultants are employed in the southern region, that's in the area of the Golan, and are involved in the fields of operations, intelligence, engineering, observations, and logistics. Hezbollah has intelligence and weapons information. Even very senior officers equivalent to generals and lieutenant generals receive a double salary, one from the Assad regime and the other from the Hezbollah terrorist organization. So this is what you're seeing all across the Middle East. It's the Iranian model, it's the model the Taliban follows, it's the model that the Pakistani intelligence service, their secret police does. Everywhere you go, this is a problem. What they're doing is they're embedding themselves deeply in the social structure of all of these countries that border on Israel. Now, why do you think they're doing that? Is it just because they want to make sure they provide social services for people in Syria that borders on the Golan? in Hezbollah and in southern Lebanon, that's all their design that they have behind their plans? I think not. This is from, you'll hear Laura Logan in a minute talk about this. The spiritual leader is now the head of state in Afghanistan with a bomb suspect set to be the prime minister. While this is going on, there are meetings going on between King Abdullah of Jordan, Sisi of Egypt, and Mahmoud Abbas. Hardly democratically elected figures, by the way, any one of them, talking about how they're trying to get water and things into Syria and help Lebanon out and that type of thing. So you understand there's all this push to kind of have this regional peace. They had a meeting in Iraq last week with leaders of countries, including Macron from France, who came in to try to set up a regional peace agreement. They had foreign ministers from a number of countries, and then they had the presidents of a number of countries. I think there were 9 total countries that sent people to this meeting in Baghdad just a week ago. Okay, now Afghanistan. We all have been watching this week. Longest war ends. We're out of it. So the war is over and everything is okay. And the narrative is going to be, and you're already seeing the narrative coming out of Washington, didn't Biden do a fantastic job? We got out, what's the number, 160,000 people? But then you ask them, well, how many Americans? Like a month ago, they were saying, well, there are 10,000 Americans in Syria. And now we've gotten all but 200, maybe, and probably even blinking says, because the blink rate when you're lying goes way up. So just watch how much Blinken is blinking, okay? We have probably less than 200. A few weeks ago, you said there were 10,000, and you knew where they are. Jen Zuckerberg was saying, well, we've been texting them and emailing them and talking to them on the phone. But there were 10,000, and you got out, I don't know, 5,000. So 10,000 minus 5,000 equals less than 200. Somebody's not telling the truth. Even Biden's Benghazi moment, the National Review, a disgrace. Here are the European countries leading. U.S.'s exit, this is from this morning's Washington Post, rekindles EU debate over funding its own military. That's kind of an interesting outflow from this. Europe is now talking, we need a European joint force. Now, they're not talking about a huge army. I think right now they're talking about a rapid deployment force of about 5,000 people. But maybe it'll grow beyond that, I don't know. And that may be significant prophetically. If it turns out to be this final beast empire comes out of Europe, then this probably is a significant moment. So put that in your little box of possibilities, watch out for it. It may be a regional part of the final beast empire. And so this is, I think, a fairly significant thing. In a phone call back in July, Biden was essentially talking to the president then of Afghanistan. He said, now listen, even in this is pretty well documented now. If things don't go too well, you just need to act like they are. Okay? You need to, Mr. President of Afghanistan, if things aren't going well, just act like they really are. And when Jen Zuckerberg, Jen the Red, was asked about this at a press briefing the other day, she said, I don't comment on private phone calls. That's exactly what she would have said during the Trump administration, I'm pretty sure, right? If there was a leak. Here's from the Times of London. This is sort of an assessment of the equipment left behind by the United States. 22,000 Humvees, 8,000 trucks, 64,000 machine guns. You wonder, now they said, well, we disabled the equipment. I've seen them driving Humvees around. So you didn't get all of them. And so now the Taliban has become probably the best armed terror organization on the planet. It's a terrorist superstate. The EU is wrestling with, now everybody's talking about, we've got to do something with the Taliban. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said, well, we're going to reach out to the Taliban. Because, of course, they can now be trusted, right? The EU ministers outlined conditions for relations with the Taliban. And I think the Taliban is probably looking around and going, I didn't think it was going to be this easy, guys. Boy, we bamboozled them. I mean, we're hardly even having to lie and they're rolling over. And people just don't understand. Here is a great graphic of the G7 having a Zoom meeting about, this is from the Times of London also, having a meeting about what to do with the Taliban. I think it's a pretty good representation. You see Trudeau there in the middle. By the way, Trudeau's campaigning. He called for early elections. And things aren't going real well with him, but he gave a speech the other day and said, hey, everything that we did on COVID, we're now going to do with climate change and other things. That ought to frighten the socks off of people. But people seem to go along with it. Well, at Dover last Sunday or Monday, the 13 U.S. service people who were killed in the ISIS-K, ISIS-Khorasan attack at the Kabul airport were returned. And look, this is a moving ceremony. This is what Glenn Beck was talking about, that we had people that were at the airport to get through. They had passports, they had everything that they needed, and the military turned them away. The State Department turned them away and pushed them back into the area where the bomb exploded. We think that people we were trying to get out, Christians we were trying to get out, were killed. And so this is the ceremony that they have, and the president went to this and stood there for all 13. I think this was the third or so one that they had, body they had transferred. It's called the transfer from the plane that carries them back from Afghanistan. This is out of sequence. So this Lapid is supposed to visit Russia this week. This just came out this morning about Syria tensions between Russia and Israel, with Israel sending missiles or bombing in there. And that's going to happen. But here's what happened at the transfer ceremony that I wanted to do. Do you see what Biden did? I slowed it down a little bit. You should be able to. And the people that were there said he did this every time one of the coffins was put in the hearse. Now, the mainstream media, MSNBC, they immediately said, well, he was adjusting the rosary that he got from his son who died a few years ago. In the military, the Gold Star parents were like, no, he did it every time a coffin was put in the hearse. And they were about ready to just get up and leave. They said the meeting with him was bizarre. He wanted to talk about his deceased son. And I get it. That's probably a big deal. Get it. But listen, you're the president of the United States of America, or you're pretending to be the president of the United States of America, so act the part. And so when I posted this on my Facebook page, and immediately everybody's like, no, he didn't check his watch. It was just sort of made up. But then USA Today came out and said, he did check his watch multiple times. But then they said, but people who make that claim, it's lacking context. Well, what's the context? Okay, would he have, was he due for medication or something like that? That's why he was checking, or is time to leave? It is time to leave. Laura Logan posted this on her Twitter account. I would highly recommend that you follow her. This was what happened in Kabul last week. This is a video, but it's mainly audio. Is what's going on as the Taliban goes through Kabul. I don't think we know right now. I don't think we know what's happening over there right now. I'm hearing horrific stories. There was a female pilot. She was, that flew for the Afghan military. She was stoned to death. You can find it. I'm not going to play the video. You can find it online if you want to. Laura said this, I'm in a terrible position of watching this tragedy unfold, knowing that the American people are being deceived and the actions of U.S. leaders make no sense. Why would any American reward al-Qaeda with absolute victory and legitimacy of a nation state on the eve of 9/11 20 years later? She was on the Hagman Report. I've been on that show a few times. And here is part of what she had to say in her interview. This was on Thursday night. You can go to Hagman Report and find it.
There's two really serious things. And one is that if you look at what Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are doing, they just had a big parade. They're parading their suicide bombers and everything else. And this visual should tell you what the United States is creating. We are creating a terrorist superstate. The world's leading superpower is groveling in the dirt at the feet of these terrorists, the same terrorists who were responsible for 9/11. And somehow we just think like we're skipping over the almost 3,000 people who were murdered, all the soldiers killed since, all the who've been wounded. And suddenly now, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and Haqqani and all of these people are our friends. And people will say, wait a minute, that's not the Taliban. Well, the deputy commander of the Taliban is the leader of the Afghan Al-Qaeda, the Haqqani network. That has been a designated foreign terrorist organization since 2012. That's the United States government's designation, right? That's not my designation. And if you talk to anybody in that region, there's a lot of cross-pollination. They marry into each other's families, but most importantly, they all fly and follow the ideology of Al-Qaeda. And what people don't realize is being created. The United States, is about to recognize some of the holiest ground in the caliphate that Osama bin Laden planned all those years ago, right? The Emirates, the Islamic Emirate of the Taliban, is the caliphate. And this is not the only one that they have been working on. They were establishing an Islamic caliphate in Libya, also called an emirate, and also in Syria, and in Yemen, and so on. And in fact, if you go back into the writings of Al-Qaeda, and especially the leader of Al-Qaeda in Libya, back in 2016, he's writing to the other jihadists saying, we have an unprecedented level of support from the Obama administration. We need to make a deal here at the negotiating table and get the Islamic Caliphate, get the Islamic Emirate established, because I'm not sure that any future U.S. government on either side in America in this election is going to be as supportive of the Emirate as these people are. Well, those very same people, right, Jake Sullivan and Susan Rice, those kind of people, they're back in power. And look what they're doing now. They're recognizing another Islamic Emirate or Caliphate where Al-Qaeda is heavily involved. Some of the most senior leaders in Al-Qaeda who have been in Pakistan for all these years have come back to Afghanistan now. Some of them never left. Many of their followers, like Siraj Haqqani. And, it is illegal for the United States under U.S. law to negotiate with and support terrorists. And yet that's exactly what they're doing right in front of our eyes, with no regard for Congress, no regard for the law, no regard for anyone, no regard for the millions of Americans on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, who are not okay with being defined by betrayal and the blood of innocent people. The Afghans who died, around 100 were killed. We don't even know how many people have died since and what injuries people suffered in that bomb that also killed the U.S. Marines. We are acting as if it's perfectly normal and reasonable to discuss what the Taliban's policy would be on the First Amendment, and whether all these fledgling, sorry, my microphone fell off, whether all these media organizations and journalists operating in Afghanistan today with the freedom that they've had for the last 20 years, what their future will be like under the Taliban. Are you serious? Like, what happened? Steve, you know me, right? Because I'm not very diplomatic. So I feel like somebody just sucked out our collective brain, chewed it up, and then vomited it on the floor. Because that's how ridiculous it is to even have this conversation. You know, what is it based on? Well, let me see. Take a look at the newsreader that's got 2 armed Taliban gunmen behind him. You know, that picture really says it all. The door-to-door executions don't do it for you? Or is it maybe, I don't know, the fact that women have been banned from public life again, that there's no entertainment and music and singing? You know, they suck all the joy out of living, these people. And not only that, this is the part that is really quite something. It is the US that we don't know what we've promised these people. There are secret amendments to this deal that US presidential envoy Zalmal Khalilzad agreed to. We don't know what the head of the CIA told Mullah Baradar from the Taliban when he met with him, not so long in Kabul. We don't know what assurances and guarantees were given. But you know what we do know? We do see the US moving towards recognizing this as a legitimate government, while at the very same moment, America's allies for the last few decades are in the Panjshir Valley fighting the Taliban with the weapons that we supplied. So now these people are these are Afghan special operations soldiers and others who were trained by the United States, trained by us, who were equipped by us, who were fighting side by side with us. Now they're fighting us because we are now on the side of the Taliban. And they're at risk. And they're at risk of being overrun and outgunned and everything else. And they now have been completely betrayed and abandoned. Whereas the Taliban is fighting, on the one side they have the US, their strongest ally, and who's pressuring through every means it can, is pressuring every neighboring country not to assist the resistance, not to assist the acting Afghan president.
So what happens is, what she goes on to relate, is exactly what Glenn Beck related, was there are people there are Christians that are there at the airport. Glenn Beck, I saw an interview with him this week, and we don't need to have a discussion about Glenn Beck's theology right now. It's very clear where I stand on that. Nevertheless, he was trying to rescue Christians from Afghanistan. They actually had people on the planes on the tarmac, and they were told by the military, White House, or State Department, no, not those people, these people need to be on your planes. They were calling countries, the State Department, to actually, I think they had planes that had to turn back and re-land at Kabul because they didn't have the right people on the planes. And so what you saw happen in Europe in 2015 and 2016 with that migration, that massive amount of migration that occurred, this is what's happening now in the United States with these Afghani refugees, and on our southern border to boot, which is not just Central American people fleeing climate change or whatever the narrative is, the ridiculous narrative of the week. So these Afghani people have now come to the United States, many unvetted. They've already found a number of terrorists embedded in there. They're mostly military-age males. They will have chain migration. And so the thinking is that ultimately there's going to be 1.5 to 2 million Afghanis brought to the United States, assuming the Taliban will let all the families and everything go. But these are not Christians. These are not the allies. These are not the interpreters, people that had green cards and SIV cards, special immigration visas. They were turned away at the airport, and other people were let through. This is a planned, deliberate takedown of the United States of America. It is open borders writ large. You need to understand that you could refer to China as an international criminal organization. Their cohorts now reside in the White House and State Department. This is pretty stunning. Even Seth Frantzman from the Jerusalem Post says this: we were led to believe that the sudden Taliban takeover was just a huge surprise. But given what we now know about how the U.S. admins were talking to the Taliban, even a presidential phone call and a later high-level intel meeting and coordination and concerns expressed to Ghani that the U.S. needed the appearance of stability in the matter. Well, what about another theory? And he goes on to say is, listen, what if the United States just did all of this on purpose? And you know what? Seth is exactly right. Seth is one of the best analysts on the Middle East. Follow him on social, on Facebook, on Twitter. I don't know what all platforms he's on, and read his stuff in the Jerusalem Post. It's always very well done. I'm always amazed too at how prolific he is, and he either has like everything highly organized, or he has probably both, and a brilliant mind to put it all together. Who knows? He says the collapse of the Ghani government and magical appearance of the Taliban, kited out and seemingly well trained for security coordination with thermal sights and M16s, is a great coincidence and in favor of stability. So now it's time for engagement via Qatar. So this thing is all connected. This was a deliberate thing. Here's a little bit more from Laura Logan.
And make no mistake, right? Pakistan is Al-Qaeda and the Taliban's #1 ally. This is their invasion. This is their proxy army. I mean, where are the leadership of the Taliban? Where have they been located for the last 20 years? In the Pakistani cities of Quetta, Peshawar, and Miram Shah. And, you know, the US could find an ISIS bomb maker in a couple of hours, right? This is the president of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh, said this. They found one ISIS chicken in a few hours, but in 20 years, they couldn't find the leadership of the Taliban inside Pakistan, right? You couldn't find any of them. Couldn't find any of those Al-Qaeda guys either who have now come back, right? So, you know, for all those people who think this is about endless war, don't be deceived by the people betraying you, because they intend to destroy this country. Who will fight for this kind of military? Who wants their child? Would you encourage your child to go into the army today? I already know the answer to that. You know, a Green Beret I spoke to yesterday, his daughter deregistered from ROTC. That is what they want. Because the people who hate this country, their agenda is actually, they wrap it up in lots of nice big bows, you know, and say it's about social justice and this and that. But what it's really about is the end of American power and the end of America itself. If you believe in an open border, if you believe that any form of patriotism is white supremacy and a form of terrorism and hate, then you don't believe in borders. Then you don't believe in America, do you? You don't believe in the flag. You don't believe in patriotism. That's not what you believe in. Well, you're in luck, because your greatest allies in this fight are the terrorists who carried out the attack on 9/11 and who don't intend to stop until this country no longer exists.
At Powerline blog, John Hinderaker says this: where's the outrage? Somebody needs to get fired or resign. Well, one guy did get fired. It was that Marine commander that I played last week. He's gone. In fact, they even came out, I don't know if you saw the follow-on to this, they even came out and said, well, he might be suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, or he might be having some mental issues. You see how they build these narratives all the time? Well, you're a white supremacist, or you're a terrorist, you're just like Al-Qaeda, you're like the Taliban, you're mentally ill if you do any of this. We live in a very different world than we lived in 8 months ago. And I know we can all hope for things. Biden still has 3 years and 4 months to go. Do you understand that? Unless something miraculous happens. Here's this: Syria and Lebanon are now boosting their ties in a blow to the U.S. Qatar is heavily involved in this, and understand, Qatar is Sunni, Al Jazeera network, very wealthy, highest per capita income of any country on planet Earth. This is where the Taliban leadership was living, in addition to Pakistan. This is where the leader of Hamas lives. We have a base there. They have all their bases. Qatar has all their bases covered, so to speak. But Qatar has a massive gas field called the South Pars gas field. You see it there north of Qatar? This is the Persian Gulf. What's the country right to the north? Iran. The South Pars gas field is a shared joint operation between Iran and Qatar. It is the largest natural gas field on planet Earth. It is the largest natural gas field on planet Earth. And this is who is kind of coordinating all of this, acting as the broker, but they're not anybody's friend. The World Cup in soccer will be played there next year. And then the other thing that happens, so we see this Eurasian map that I showed you last week. And so Afghanistan is right here. I don't know if you can, I guess my cursor's not showing up. Well, hang on here. So anyway, so Afghanistan is right there. And do you see all the country to the east is Pakistan? And you see Afghanistan has a little corridor over to China. That little narrow, go to the right a little bit. Go to the right. See that little narrow corridor there? Right over here. I don't know why my cursor's not showing up. Anyway, over there's a corridor from Afghanistan to China. China's that big green area country on the right. They're all green, I know. But that's China, and there's that little narrow corridor from Afghanistan. But remember, I did do this last year. There's a great series in the Southeast, or the South China Morning Post, and it talks about the Belt and Road Initiative of China and what they're putting, the network that they're putting together all across the region. And one of those is a road that goes down from China through Pakistan and then along the coast to a giant port that they've built there on the ocean that China has built. It's one of the largest ports in the world. So China is fully on board on this. And China, they've got thousands of advisors in Afghanistan right now. I think they may have recognized the Taliban government. And also just to the west of Gwadar Port is also a port that Iran just opened that allows Iran to get all of its gas and oil without having to go through the Persian Gulf, which means Iran could shut down the Persian Gulf. So that's why you see all these other countries, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, all kind of scrambling to get some kind of alternative method to deliver their gas and oil because they may not have access to the Persian Gulf. So this is all very big. This is a little interview on Tucker about, so what happened to all that military equipment? It all stayed in Afghanistan, right? No, it didn't. Here's from the Times of London, U.S. vehicles were taken to where? Tehran. And here's some comments from Victor Davis Hanson, who is the greatest military historian living on planet Earth today. Here's what he had to say on Tucker the other night.
This is the greatest loss of military equipment in the history of warfare by one power. It's absolutely staggering, and yet we take it so nonchalantly. The people responsible for this should be either fired or resign. They've done so much damage to the United States, and they've empowered a pre-civilizational terrorist band into making them into a considerable, militia that will cause havoc for the next 20 years. And I think it's just atrocious, and nobody's taking any blame for it. This is well aside from the 7,000 scanners they left that they are now using to find out who helped us. This is beyond the list of names of people who wanted to get out that the Taliban have. And the final thing, Tucker, is we were told by a top-ranking general again and again that the Taliban and we had the same agenda. We wanted out quickly by the 31st. They did, so we could trust them. We were working together, but we didn't have an agenda that was anywhere near theirs, because their agenda was, we want you out on the 31st, but we want to cause as much humiliation, death, and destruction as we can get away with so you don't come back, and we wanted none of that. So there's something terribly wrong with our military. I don't know whether it's their distraction because of wokeness as they go through the ranks and the rosters trying to weed out potential, supremacists, or they're just incompetent, or they're too worried about the revolving door going in and out from defense contractor boards. But we need a bipartisan investigation of our top brass and the system. It's a systemic failure, and it's costing us dearly.
And then there's Turkey, who announced this new Turkish Pentagon in the shape of the crescent. They actually broke ground on it. This will cover, if my conversion from square meters is correct, 300 acres of building on 3,500 acres of land in Turkey. They laid the foundation for that in a ceremony this week. And of course, immediately during that ceremony, what did they do? You see the crescent there on the left in the screen, and they had an Islamic prayer to bless it. So look, this is where we are. Turkey is very significant, and they've had financial trouble, but it also came out this week that Turkey is now having, in terms of the world today, the record financial growth of anybody on planet. So I don't think, and then somebody said, well, I think Erdogan may want to step down. I don't see that happening, folks. I don't know who these, it'd be great to be an analyst. And then this was one significant, I end with this slide. The Euphrates is drying up in Syria and threatening a disaster. And this was a years-long drought that led to some rising food prices, that led to the riots in Dara back in March of 2011, which started off the Syrian civil war that we lived there. And a lot of the reason for drying up, look, they always talk about all this stuff about fires and floods and hurricanes. Everything was climate change, climate change, climate change. And even in this article from France 24, they say it's climate change, climate change. But then embedded in the article, you'll eventually find the truth that, well, a lot of this really has to do with the dams that Erdogan has built in Turkey that's shutting off the flow of the river. So now we see water problem maybe in Egypt with Ethiopia building a dam. And we have Syria having problems because of dams that Erdogan has built. Iraq is pretty much out of water. And they're having record temperatures, 50 degrees or more centigrade, which is like 115 degrees or more. That's hot. And they don't have the power because whatever dams they have aren't able to do their hydroelectric. This is what all I'm saying is it's just, look, it's crisis everywhere you look, folks. I have to tell you the truth. I would like to get up here and say everything is great, but Egypt has a dam problem. Syria has a dam problem. Iraq has a dam problem. And a lot of this is setting the stage for the Euphrates drying up. We know this happens in the book of Revelation. Not there yet, but it's not hard to believe that that would happen, right? So look, Jesus is coming back. You're going to clear all this mess up. Until then, we have to what? 1 Corinthians 16, stand firm in the faith and act like men. Don't be little girls. God's not given, Philippians 4, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power. So take a stand. Take a stand. Tell the truth. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word, Lord. I just pray that you will remind us that you have not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and to give us the courage to stand firm in our faith and to speak the truth in love, but to speak the truth in love and be bold. And whatever we do, and that all that we do, we will act in a manner that will glorify you. Bless us this week in Jesus' name, amen.